to ensure that the survivors of 9/11, both our police officers, our firefighters, our emergency responders, and the many civilians from the many construction trades and other areas who came to assist, not only on that day for weeks and months and now even years later, to assist. This piece of legislation, it is essential that it be moved forward. The clock is ticking, and so we are here today to continue to keep this in the public eye, to keep focus on this issue. These two senators have done yeoman's work trying to do that. They're involved in ongoing negotiations, and I want to thank them publicly here on behalf, certainly, of the men and women that I represent, the retirees, many of whom are now dealing with illnesses that came about as a result of their work on the pile and in the days following 9/11. 23 New York City police officers perished on that day. Since that time, we have lost another 115 who have passed due to illnesses that they contracted during their time working at the 9/11 site. This country has an obligation. It has an obligation, it has a debt to those who went toward the danger and stayed in danger. And so today I appreciate your coverage of the remarks that will be made here, and I will appreciate your continued focus on the legislative process that we hope, before Congress adjourns this session, passes this legislation, this much-needed, essential piece of legislation. With that, I would like to turn it over to the senior senator from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer. Senator.
Thank you. Well, let me thank Commissioner Bratton. I worked with him when he was commissioner in the 90s under Mayor Giuliani. We worked together very hard to pass a crime bill which reduced crime largely to the good work of the men and women and the people who work for them behind us. And it's a pleasure to work with him once again as police commissioner of New York City. He does an amazing job, as do the over 30,000 men and women who work under him every day, every day, every day, keeping us safe. I also want to thank my good friend, Senator Gillibrand, who's just been incredible as we've moved through this. She has been relentless, never stopping, always focusing, and we couldn't have done this without her, and I thank her for that. I also thank all of my colleagues in the House, bipartisan, Peter King, Jerry Nadler, Carolyn Maloney, and others who are working. Now, this display is beautiful, and a couple of the people who rushed to the towers and suffered illnesses are here with us, and their pictures are here. It was fortuitous. When the police department asked me to get space for this display, it was months and months ago. It's fortuitous, maybe fate at work, that we're all here today to commemorate the heroism of first responders in the aftermath of 9/11. This display was always meant to remind us, senators, congressmen, congresswomen, and the millions of visitors who come to the Capitol, of the sad truth that while 9/11 was over 14 years ago, the aftershocks are still being felt by victims, their families, the brave men and women who ran to the towers as others were running out. As we fight to get the Zadroga Act reauthorized, there could be no more vital, important image than the display you see. And I hope everybody here in the media and elsewhere will go and look at all of the pictures, photographs, and others that are here. And I want to say to the police and the fire and the first responders, your voices are important. We are getting close. We've made good progress in the last few days. But when you're here, we make more progress. When you go away, maybe some people slide back. So your being here is essential, and we thank you. We thank our great police voices. We thank our fire voices. We thank our first responder voices who come to the halls of Congress. And when they come, senators and congressmen who are not on the Zadroga Act fold like playing cards and sign on. So do some more work today, men and women. Do some more of your good work. Thanks to your efforts and the work of my colleagues, who's been adding Senator Gillibrand's been adding co-sponsor after co-sponsor after co-sponsor. We have 66 votes in the Senate, 259 in the House. More than enough to pass it. We can all do the math. We have the votes. Far more than a majority in the House, filibuster proof in the Senate. The only thing standing in our way is some of the Republican leadership who act like they are under no rush to pass this bill, or the omnibus for that matter, which is the last vehicle for Zadroga. Bear in mind the health program already has expired. It's drawing down on remaining funds. The clock's ticking. Republican leadership are blowing through deadline after deadline. We nearly had it. Everyone but one would have put this on the transportation bill. We would have seen this display. We still would have had this ceremony with the display, but the tension wouldn't be in the air because we would have passed the bill and the first responders whose health was put in jeopardy would have been protected. But we're here, and we cannot let it happen again. I was so disappointed in the transportation bill to hear some of my colleagues use Zadroga as a trading piece, like some bargaining chip. The lives of our first responders is not a bargaining chip and can never be. You don't trade it. Oh, we may do that if you do this. No way. This is our obligation. Just as we shouldn't have a bargaining chip for the soldiers who fight for us. Oh, we'll give you the bullets and the K-rations you need only if we get this. We wouldn't do that. We shouldn't do it to these folks either. That's the bottom line. This is a life-changing, life-saving health program for those who protected us. And to say Democrats are getting something, or anyone is getting something by letting it, but when the other side lets it go through the bill, that's not how it should be, and we're here to see that it is not. So, we should have gotten this a long time ago, but we've been here before. We had our backs up against the wall when we first passed it, and praise God, at the last minute it was passed. We're very hopeful, I'd say optimistic, that scenario will be playing itself out in the same way this year, that at the last minute we will get this done due to the hard work of my colleagues and, more importantly, due to the hard work of so many who are here today, from fire, from police, from first responders. Special tribute, he's modest, he doesn't like it, but John Field has done an amazing job, and he's standing there modestly in his Army gear. Well, not his gear, but his jacket. So, if we did it then, we can do it now, and we will. But we have to focus all our attention on this issue. I saw the Jon Stewart show. I hope people did. He showed a picture of his show 4 years ago, 2010, 5 years ago. And there were 4 people, first responders, who had gotten illnesses by rushing to the towers. He showed the picture again when he was on TV this week. One was there with him. There were 3 empty chairs. They had passed. They were gone because of their heroism. Can't let that happen to more people. We absolutely cannot let that happen to more people, and we won't. Senator Gillibrand.
Well said. Well, I'm very grateful for Senator Schumer's leadership on this. As you can tell, this is something he feels so deeply and passionately about, and his leadership has made all the difference in passing the first bill and has made all the difference in getting us to where we are today. I also want to thank Commissioner Bratton for coming down, for bringing so many of his police officers with him. The statistics for his department aren't great. In fact, over 550 New York City Police Department personnel have had to retire due to 9/11 injuries, and over 94 New York Police Department officers and over 110 firefighters have died of 9/11 injuries since 9/11. So we are here amid some very powerful artwork that brings our first responders' lives in a way forward that words simply can't. One look at these illustrations and we're reminded of all the horrors that took place on 9/11. We're reminded of the heroism and the bravery of our NYPD officers. During the attacks and during the aftermath, how they carried bodies, ran into towers, and dug in the rubble for remains. We are reminded of how tragic it is that these men and women are sick and dying and have already passed away because they were brave, because they answered the call of duty when we asked them to be there. We're reminded that more police officers have died since 9/11 than on 9/11. And we're reminded how shameful it is that Congress still has not passed a permanent reauthorization of the health and compensation programs. I hope all of my colleagues have a chance to come and see this exhibit, especially those members who have failed and refused to sign on to our bill. These illustrations will refresh their memories about what our nation actually went through on that horrific day and the days and weeks and months afterwards. Because if they aren't moved to act after seeing these images, I don't know what would move them to act. We're now closer than ever to actually reauthorizing the 9/11 health bill permanently and having a fully paid for program. And we've gotten this close because the men and women standing here with me, because our first responders, because John Field and all the advocates have come down to Washington week after week and demanded action of our leaders. The lack of urgency, the lack of empathy is shocking. But they come down week after week and tell their stories. And it's their stories that are making the difference. And I promise you, nothing ever gets done in Washington unless regular people stand up and demand action. And that is what these men and women have done. So Senator Schumer and I urge all our colleagues to do the right thing, to sign on to this bill, to pass the 9/11 health bill and pass it and reauthorize it permanently. We will get this done. Thank you.
We have several other presentations, if I may, and I'll introduce them. But first, if I may, the group behind me, all New York City police officers, all worked on 9/11 in the weeks and months after. Several are dealing with illnesses that were contracted there. The illustrations that you have here, one of then police officer Ryan, now Sergeant Ryan. Sergeant Ryan is here, still dealing with illnesses contracted at that time. Deputy Chief Terry Tobin, the illustration directly behind me, Terry is depicted in there. I'm also very grateful that our union leadership are all behind us here also, who have been working diligently on this bill. Representing that union leadership, we'll have several speakers. We'll have Deputy Inspector Roy Richter, who's president of the Captains Endowment Association, Michael Palladino, president of our Detectives Endowment Association, and Bob Ganley, vice president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association. With that, I'd like to invite up Deputy Inspector Roy Richter. Roy.
Thank you, Commissioner. September 11, 2001, it's been said many times, but police, fire, first responders in New York City, we did our job and we ended up defending our country against a terrorist attack. 5 years ago, I think it was right around this time, it was passed that Christmas miracle, December 21st or 22nd of that year. We were dealing with not just passing the bill and convincing people, but we had to convey the reality that we were facing, which was our peers, our coworkers were being diagnosed and dying of rare cancers and lung ailments. And the science had not caught up with that fact that we were dealing with. Here we are 5 years later, and unfortunately the 5 years later, because that first bill came with an expiration date, but the illnesses that our members were dealing with didn't have an expiration date, and it doesn't have an expiration date. But the science has caught up with that reality we were facing. And the science has shown that the rates of cancer in these rare cancers is exponentially higher than it is for the regular population, shockingly. I can't help but stand here and with the images that I see around me and remember the people that I came down with 5 years ago. Barry Galfano, who was a captain in the emergency service unit, who was had an advanced degree in biology and chemical science, who was an emergency service unit captain digging his members out. He's passed. He's died from a rare cancer. Don Fieser, who I presented a picture of his vehicle. He was in charge of the motor vehicle transport unit, and his car was just obliterated and covered in dust. He's dead from a rare cancer. Lou Turco is here from the Lieutenants Union. He's the president of the Lieutenants Union, but 5 years ago, Tom Sullivan was the president of the Lieutenants Union. He's dead of esophageal cancer. I look at the pictures around here in the back. A street cop, Steve Bonanno, who was a deputy chief in the NYPD when he retired, but unfortunately he didn't get to retire. He died before he retired. And he was a first responder in the emergency service unit at that time. And talk about a guy that would give you his shirt off the back. I see Tom Pertell, who September 11th, 2001, he had a habit of raising his voice but demanding attention. And fortunately for hundreds of people that lined up and mobilized that day in front of the building, he came and just as hundreds of police officers were mobilizing in front of the building, he said, and he used a lot more colorful language, but get out of here and move further away from those buildings. And that day he saved hundreds. But many of those people, many of those police officers, male and female, they've all contracted rare cancers, lung ailments, and they've since lost their lives. Last, 5 years ago, there was another captain, Pat DeSarlo, who came down. And Pat had a rare lymphoma. He had just had his second stem cell transplant. With his illness, he's continued to battle. And last week, he's now completed his fourth stem cell transplant. He's still battling. His expiration is his life. This bill should not have an expiration date. It's something that needs to be made permanent, and I pray that Congress steps forward and makes this bill permanent. Thank you.
Well done, Roy. Good job.
Mike Palladino heads up our Detectives Endowment Association. Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. First, I have some thank yous. I want to thank Commissioner Bratton for his leadership and his support on this particular issue. I have to thank our two senators, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand. Seems like yesterday, but we were here in this very spot 5 years ago, and I have complete confidence that you will get this passed for us. On September 11th, we lost two detectives, Claude Richards and Joseph Vigiano. Since then, we have lost 35 detectives, 28 of which have been recognized, and the other 7 will probably be recognized in the year 2016. For some reason or another, the rank of detective seems to be mostly affected of all the ranks in the NYPD. I can only guess that because Ground Zero was deemed a crime scene, the landfill out in Staten Island became solely a detective operation. Now, the name, James Zadroga, it's associated with the legislation, both in Congress and up in New York State. But there's more to James Zadroga than just the name being associated with the legislation. And if I could just tell you, on September 11th, when he woke up in the morning, Jimmy Zadroga was a healthy young man. He was called to duty. He spent a lot of hours down at Ground Zero. He spent some time at the landfill as well. And unfortunately, he got sick. And I came to know Jimmy Zadroga during his illness. And I tell you, he was an extraordinarily healthy young man. He was an extraordinary detective. And unfortunately, Jimmy was dealt a very difficult deck in life. As he struggled with a long illness, his young wife, the mother of his young daughter, she passed away as well from a very strange illness. And Jimmy rarely complained, and he wasn't bitter about his fate. All Jimmy really cared about was his little daughter, Tyler Ann, and thank heaven she's grown up. She's a teenager, thanks to Jimmy's mother and father, Joe and Linda Zadroga. If I can also recall, if you look back there on the 9/11 roll call, number 41, a gentleman by the name of Corey Diaz. He worked in a small unit inside of headquarters, but he spent a lot of time down at Ground Zero. He was a good detective. He was well liked. He was liked enough where his colleagues voted him the DEA union delegate from that particular command. And he passed away as well, but from date of diagnosis to the day that he passed away was only 7 days, unlike Jimmy Zadroga, who suffered over a long period of time. I would just like to close by saying, I'm begging Congress once again to pass this bill. The significance of this bill is not about those who passed. The significance of this bill is for those who are sick now, who continue to get sick, but it's also for those people who worked at Ground Zero and thankfully are not yet sick, they're not symptomatic, but in the event that they become symptomatic and sick as we move forward, the significance of this bill is to make sure that there is funding for their health and their safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Great job.
Bob Ganley, who is the Vice President of our Sergeants Benevolent Association. Bob.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Commissioner Bratton and the Society of Illustrators for bringing this exhibit to Washington, D.C. It's a tremendous tribute to the courage and heroism of the men and women of the NYPD who work day in and day out to keep our city safe. I'd also be remiss, of course, if I didn't thank Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand for being here today and for your untiring efforts to pass this legislation to reauthorize the James Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act this year. For most of us up here today, this is not the first time we've traveled to D.C. to push Congress to do the right thing for the tens and thousands of first responders who are suffering from 9/11 health-related illnesses. We were here as recently as 2 weeks ago, walking the halls of the House of Representatives, urging members to support passage of the Zadroga Act. The simple fact is, we really can't wait any longer. We need Congress to act now. Far too many of us left our health on the pile and at the Fresh Kills landfill. We did so willingly, rushing into an environment that was more toxic than anything we have ever seen before or since. 14 years later, we are sick and we are dying because despite what we were told, the air at Ground Zero was not safe to breathe. You know, as Mike said earlier, and Roy, about 5 years ago we were here, close to this exact spot, with these two fine senators, the former police commissioner, my fellow union leaders behind me, and widows that came to support in that piece of legislation. And we were here for a special exhibit that was brought to Capitol Hill by the New York City Police Museum. And Senators, you'll remember that exhibit featured the shields of each member of the NYPD who by that point had died of a 9/11 related illness. There were 29 shields on that display in 2010. 29. That was a powerful display of the toll that 9/11 continues to take on our department. One of those shields belonged to Sergeant Mike Ryan, whose widow Eileen accompanied me that day. Mike's watch ended, unfortunately, in 2007, struck down by 3 different forms of an aggressive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma caused by working more than 80 hours a week at the Fresh Kills landfill. He was only 41 years old at the time of his death, leaving behind 4 young children, all under the age of 12. And just most recently, within the past 2 weeks, we lost 2 more retired sergeants from very aggressive forms of cancer that have not been tied to 9/11 yet, but they will be in the year 2016. So if we don't recreate that display today, right here in this building, there'd be quite a few more shields on display, over 100. And that number keeps going up. And not just from within the members of the NYPD, the ranks of the sick and fallen now come from every state and from 433 of the 435 congressional districts. That is why at the end of the day, the Zadroga Act is not just a New York issue, it's a response to a national health crisis. We can't wait any longer, nor should we. Congress needs to do its job. It needs to end the uncertainty for tens of thousands of first responders who are wondering if there will be a health program next year. You did the right thing 5 years ago. Now it's time to do the right thing again and fully reauthorize the Zadroga Act now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Senator. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
Commissioner, thank you.
You're on, Commish.
Senator Schumer, Senators Gillibrand, and myself open for questions that you might have about the presentation that we just made.
Look, it can go in either one. We just have to get it passed. The other side is insisting on so-called pay-fors, even though we're going to have hundreds of billions of dollars of tax cuts that are not paid for. But we are working productively, Democratic leadership, Republican leadership, on finding those pay-fors, and we're making good progress on that. If that happens, it is more likely to go into the omnibus bill than in the tax extenders bill. If we can't find the pay-fors, then we'll try to put in the tax extenders bill, making the argument there's $100 billion, $400 billion, $700 billion of unpaid for tax. We don't have to pay for these. We don't have to find a pay-for these people above all. The omnibus or the agreement on the paid-fors? The agreement on the paid-fors, we're making progress. The omnibus, there's still a whole bunch of riders not related to 9/11 that are being negotiated. There are a lot of them. It's a long, hard slog. Commissioner.
I wish I knew. It is ironic. Yesterday there was a hearing that the FBI Director Comey testified at before the Senate. Today there's one before the House discussing the increasing concerns around terrorism, increasing concerns around attacks here in the United States, whatever their inspiration, and the fear. And isn't it ironic that we still haven't paid the debt to the first responders from the events of 9/11, a debt that was continued by the over 200 officers in San Bernardino not more than 2 weeks ago, that we are here discussing this issue of increasing acts of terrorism in this country, and we still have not resolved this issue. That is the ultimate irony. And the two senators that I just cannot thank them enough for continuing to, unfortunately, have to fight a battle uphill in this body to get these acts passed. It just defies logic. It really defies logic.
Any others? Thank you very much. Last one. Well, it's easier. As you know, the rules of the Senate, anyone can prevent anything from passing on its own, so it's harder to do. We hope we don't have to try to do that.
Thank you
Okay?
all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Great job,
Mr. Schumer, thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
So much. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you,
down.
Chief.
Really, I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Hey, Richie. Nice to see you, buddy. You're the best, my friend.
Sir, I'm a reporter. I just want to make sure I get that. You were talking about technical. Your name is?
My name is Michael Palladino, P-A-L-L-A-D-I-N-O, President of New York City Detective.
I just walked around. Okay. And you were saying that James Zadroga worked at
Hey, how are you? Yes, great to see you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, we're gonna go.